Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie and I have a headache. I'm having this brain flare. That is not right. Thankfully I'm not having a brain flare, whatever that would be. I'm having a pain flare up that I think is making my brain fog worse. So hopefully I'll make sense in it. So today's video is a wrap up of the books I read in August. I'll start with this book, which I didn't finish. I DNF'd it, but I did talk about it being on my summer TBR, and I talked about like trying to read it, I think. This is A Woman's Affair by Leanne Dupuji, translated by Graham Anderson. I simply did not care. I just found it like overall boring, so I just decided not to make myself read it. If you're interested in Sapphic, Paris and lesbianism, let me know and I'll send it to you. Kind of a shame, but also that's how it goes sometimes, I guess. The next book I read pretty fast, and that's In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, which I also picked up in August, so it was nice to read immediately. This is like a memoir about experiencing domestic abuse, like being in a like sapphic a relationship that is abusive, and it's also thinking about the other kind of like mostly like feminist and like often like lesbian forward engagements with like what abuse is like in queer relationships and for like sapphic women, mostly centered on like women who are in relationships with other women who are being abused. And it's written in a format that's like every kind of section, which is somewhat of like a vignette, I would say. They have like a sort of particular lens or theme, sometimes so almost like a genre, but not all of them are like generic, I would say. So for example, like this is Dream House as warning, Dream House as idiom, Dream House as myth, Dream House as Generation Starship, Dream House as epilogue. And yeah, it goes through the time, like the whole relationship, so both from the beginning in terms of like meeting this woman in the dream house, which is what she's referred to in this, to the end of the relationship. Yeah, and it also, like I said, it brings in some of the other work that people have produced that like engages with like sapphic abusive relationships and intimate partner violence in general. It definitely is I don't know that I would say that it's like aged, but there's definitely some things that indicate its age, in the sense, and like Carmen Maria Machado's like particular like upbringing and age, like there is quite a lot of focus because of the time when this was happening. So there's like quite a lot of focus on discussion around like gay marriage, because that was like one of the things in the like queer life zeitgeist at the time when this was like happening to Carmen. The back describes the way this is written as each section being linked to a narrative trope, which I don't think is true for all of them, because I don't think that like an epilogue is a narrative trope, although I guess you could make an argument that it is. And like an idiom, I don't think that's a narrative trope. However, I think that is also like a useful way to think about it. And but I also would say that it's like very forward with its like fairy tale-esque part. One of my favorite things that recurs throughout it is it will have like a footnote reference to the motif index of folk literature, and it will say like type C423.3 taboo revealing experiences in other world, and there are like others like that elsewhere. Thomson motive index of folk literature type X905.4 the liar, I have no time to lie today, lies nevertheless. I read this book, like I read the majority of this book in one day after having watched the film May December, so I was thinking a lot about abuse and it was not a very nice time, but I also thought that this was done very well. I think the one thing that I feel like is maybe underexplored is the like ending of the relationship in this, and the way that Carmen Maria Machado like is in some way able to like extricate herself from the woman in the dream house via the fact that the woman in the dream house like somewhat lets her go. And I don't think that that is like typical of lots of abusive relationships, and I think, you know, that it tends to be the most dangerous part of a relationship is the end of an abusive relationship, because the consequences of leaving can really badly impact the person trying to leave, you know, up to being killed by their partner. And I felt like that part was maybe underexplored, and it kind of just came together at the end, and then she does kind of have a happy ending like in this book and also in life, which I'm very happy and glad for her for. I just felt like, considering some of the like things that she referenced, like the literature and like, yeah, I don't know, I just felt like that was kind of the one part of it I felt that was underexplored. but I think it's written pretty solidly, and yeah, I definitely recommend it if it sounds like the kind of thing that you're interested in and would like to read. Obviously it's about abuse. Like, the next book I read was The End of Days by Jenny Erpenbeck, translated by Susan Bonofsky. I was pretty disappointed in this novel, and I think clearly I did just have too high expectations for it, so it was partially on me, but I also just think, like, as a book, it didn't really do it for me. It kind of follows the life of like one woman, but it's done in this way where like the baby dies at the very beginning, and then we have this kind of like intermezzo, that's what it's called, between book 1 and book 2, and then in that intermezzo it's sort of like a counterfactual rewriting or like replaying, but with the child baby living, and that happens at multiple stages of this like woman's life. I just felt like the characters were kind of like quite vague and also sometimes interchangeable. I definitely felt like, especially at the beginning, it was really hard to tell who was being talked about, because there was like that people were being referred to with their like family name. I don't mean like their last name, I mean like the role they are in a family. But obviously that changes, especially if you have a baby child that has just been born. I don't know why I said baby child but if you just have a baby because that changes, like that staggers everything upwards. So then it just became quite confusing to me. But yeah, it gets less confusing I think as the narrative goes on, although there is also like a sister character that I think also becomes somewhat interchangeable with the like main, like older sister who is the like main character of this book. And I also felt like there was some strange like gaps and strange like focuses. Like, it's kind of unsyncopated in how you experience the history that this woman has lived through, which I thought was kind of telling in a way. But I don't know, one thing that I was surprised about is that I kind of expected it to mostly just be set in Germany in the 1900s. Like, it does begin, I think the baby is born in like 1903 or something, so like very at the beginning of the century. It wasn't set in Germany the whole time. It started actually in like, I think in the like Austro-Hungarian Empire, and there's quite a lot set in Vienna, which I did enjoy / I thought was quite interesting. Don't know that I enjoyed any part of this book, to be honest, but yeah, because the other thing is it kind of feels like too slight for what it's trying to do. And after a while, the like intermezzo between book bridges reincarnation of this character from her death that you just read, it just becomes a bit like, I don't know, it feels like unfair to say gimmicky. And I guess if it disappeared wholly, it would also seem kind of strange, because that's part of the way this book is writing itself. It just became rote, I guess. I don't know, I was just like disappointed. There were some bits about Judaism that I liked how it was included. There's some discussion about Shabbat and Talmud, which I obviously was here for. But I also think like it's a story that's complicated in terms of like Jewish life in like Germany, that kind of area. Oh, I suppose, anyway, whatever, you know what I'm talking about, like the area of Europe that has like Germany, Austria, because yeah, like basically the character's mother, she marries purposefully like her daughter to like a goy, like she's Jewish, because like she like her husband was like murdered in a pogrom, and she obviously doesn't want her kid to experience the like anti-Semitism of it, so it's this very like specific attempt to like make her daughter safe. And obviously that like within her family like doesn't go off well, and like her grandfather sits like shiva for the like daughter when she does marry this like goyish man. So yeah, so Judaism is both like part of it, and like Jewishness is there at the same time as being kind of like arrested, or it's not really the word, like subaltern in a way, I guess that's not also what I mean, but like it's kind of underground whilst it's also still there. And it obviously also gets lesser and lesser as like the woman herself like is more and more farther away from the people who are Jewish in her life. Anyway, I don't know, I was just yeah, so like it wasn't what I thought it would be, and I guess that was kind of dissatisfying. Let me know if you read this. I don't think I will read more of Jenny Erpenbeck's work. I kind of am a bit, I don't know that I'm put off, but I just feel like I don't really want to read this. I did see someone's review of this who said that like she didn't like other Jenny Erpenbeck works, but she really liked this one, which I thought potentially meant that I might like her other work, but then hearing people describe them, especially Kairos, I definitely don't think I'll like that. I don't want to read about horrible relationships that are like metaphors for like state treatment. The next book I read is this book, A Girl Among the Anarchists by Isabel Meredith, which is the pseudonym of two siblings called Helen and Olivia Rossetti. What I read about this represented it wrong to me because it said that it was like about like an alternative community, which I suppose you could argue it is, but like I thought they meant like an alternative community that was being like coming into being from like leftist British Victorians in the 1890s and early 1900s, where they would like build these like communal spaces to live alternatively with people, and that is not what this is. This is mostly about a anarchist newspaper. It's like a fake autobiography of Isabel Meredith, because obviously she didn't exist. But you know, she ends up being the editor, the like, you know, main force behind this anarchist journal called Tocsin, which like TOCSIN, which, you know, is like sounding an alarm. And of course, like Helen and Olivia Rossetti, they edited, I believe, like coordinated a journal called The Torch, which definitely has similar energy as the Tocsin, and clearly this is like the experiences written about in here are like inspired by their own experiences. I think it comes off pretty pessimistic in the end. I read this for my PhD, so I was reading it in like a particular capacity, I guess. But I mean, it was an interesting novel. It did kind of feel like Charles Dickens, but if it was about like anarchists. So there is definitely this like sense of comedy to it, and the like figures are kind of larger than life, but then at the same time it does feel like there is like a kernel, or more than a kernel, of truth to like a lot of it, and some of the outlandishness of these characters is partially why it like ultimately concludes in quite a pessimistic way, like politically, which I was quite disappointed with. I felt like Helen and Olivia Rossetti wouldn't end kind of coming to the conclusion that like anarchism is kind of useless and the work they were doing was pointless. I don't know that much about them, and I haven't actually yet read the introduction because I didn't want to read about the plot yet, but I will read that, and hopefully it will give me a bit more insight into like their own experiences, and also like how much of like a Venn diagram between their life and this novel there is, you know, like how big that kind of overlap is. That would be interesting to know. Really strange cover choice, like image, to be honest. Like it doesn't feel relevant really at all, but yeah, like I was also really interested in how this represented women, which isn't to say there's like that much engagement with that, but I do feel like there are these particular moments in the book which show like the way that women are conceived in terms of like radical political struggle, and also sometimes the sort of like inherently reactionary nature of women, but also like the misogyny of like the men that they are like engaging with inside of this like particular kind of movement, like an international anarchist movement. And it was also much more internationalist than I thought it would be. There was like this moment where like an anarchist blew himself up at Greenwich Park, is that what it was called? Like the Greenwich Observatory, in like 1894. So like anarchists did become like renowned for just blowing themselves up, partially because of that instance, and there was lots of like questions behind it. People don't really know what happened or why, as far as I can tell. And then so this happens, there's like a fictionalized kind of version of events where that also sort of happens, and that's one of the ways that she, like Isabel Meredith, like gets involved in the paper to begin with, because people, like the area is being raided and people are leaving, and that's kind of like her moment of joining the anarchist movement. And the original paper that they started with, like before she joins in, is called The Bomb. So, you know, it's sort of like tongue-in-cheek about lots of things, but also, yeah, I don't know, it was a mixed bag, but obviously glad to have read it for my work. I feel like this month has been quite ambivalent about my reading, because the next thing I read was Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector, which was translated by Alison Entrekin, and this was also on my like summer to read list, so I'm glad that I got to it. But I really didn't like it in the end. Unfortunately I think I do have to say that, which I feel like, well, it kind of surprises me. I thought I would like it. I just felt like it was very empty, honestly, and I felt like it was so solipsistic in a way that I was a bit like, and? I was kind of intrigued by the fact that, like, so in the introduction to this, which is by Benjamin Moser, like he talks about how when this was first published in its original language, which is Portuguese, like Brazilian Portuguese, the like Brazilian literary landscape felt like responded to the like foreignness of Clarice Lispector's language and her like idiosyncratic use of language. And one thing that I feel like is kind of crazy is that there's no like translation note from Alison Entrekin about this and about like her process or whatever, how she approached this translation, which I think is wild because there's words in this novel that Clarice Lispector created. So surely that should be like discussed by the translator. Like Tindlen, like that word is from here, like it's so then I did do a bunch. I was like looking to see what the translator said about this novel, especially because there was only one time really when I was reading it that I was like, that's a genuinely bizarre way to describe something. Like she talked about like someone's eyes dilating, and I was like, that's not what like happens. But like in the translation, like the translator interview that I did read, like Alison Odrikin talked about how like Clarice meant that as in like your eyes opening and shutting, like not like being able to see your eyes dilate, but like the dilation being about anyway. So that was like the one moment where I felt like the strangeness of the actual language itself was like present. I mean it is kind of like a verbal onslaught so it's not that it's like completely neutralized or anything, but I did just feel a bit like, yeah, that was really lacking for me, and I think that would have made it more interesting if I could have read like a proper description or like exploration of like why Alison Odrikin made the decision she made, like in a more coherent way than just like reading an interview with her where she kind of talks about some bits but it's like an interview. Yeah, I was trying to think about whether this means like I'm just maybe Clarice Lispector isn't for me, but I still would like to read more of her work. I just was like surprised at not caring. Obviously I know this was like her first novel. I have also heard from people that it gets more like that. It seems like maybe the things that I didn't like about it get more in her later work. But I do kind of feel like because this book was sort of had a plot and it also didn't, I think like I'd prefer it if you went one way or the other instead of like kind of trying to hold on to a plot when you like don't really seem that interested in the plot. And there would be passages where I would be like, wow, that's amazing, and then I like would reread them and I would become less enchanted by them immediately, which yeah was just again not something I thought would happen. I don't know, I feel like I'm letting people down. I feel like I should like this. Let me know if you think there's like another one that I should read of her novels. I mean, like the thing is, because her work is like so big, I am interested in reading The Passion According to G.H. I do think it's kind of hilarious that the like introduction to this really like hammers home this idea that like Clarice Lispector's language was like exotic and then has become naturalized into like the Brazilian literary canon, and then the like translator of this elsewhere, maybe that's why because there was like such divergent opinions, I don't know, but like the translator of this was basically like, that's not like an accurate or fair assessment of Clarice Lispector, and like much has been made of her foreignness, which is like overblown or something. Anyway, I don't know, talk to me about this. Do you also not like it? Please tell me. I definitely read less than I wanted to this month, but it has been like really tough with just like pain stuff I'm having. So that's that. But I'm glad I got to, even if I DNF'd one of them, like these two, which have been on my to read list for a long time. And it was also good to get to this, even if it was somewhat of a, like it wasn't a super slog, but it wasn't, it was very different than I expected it to be, and so wasn't as useful. At least, well, maybe it's actually more useful for what it is, but I don't know, whatever. It was also an ambivalent experience. And also this was an ambivalent experience, but I did think this was good. So I guess that's something. And also I have been reading by listening to the audiobook of the Red Comet Heather Clark Sylvia Plath biography, so I guess that has also taken up a chunk of my reading as well. But I have nothing to show for it because it's such a long book. Yeah, okay, I think I'm gonna leave it there. I hope I made sense in this. Let me know how your month of reading was and your thoughts on any of the books I mentioned. I hope you're having a lovely day when you're watching this, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye!